Welcome everybody, we'll be starting very shortly. Welcome everybody to this evening's UK launch of the new Common Security Report 2022 for our shared future. This year marks the 40th anniversary of Olof Palme's Independent Commission on Disarmament and Security Issues. The Commission presented its report in 1982 at the height of the Cold War, and the Commission developed the concept of common security, the idea that nations and populations can only feel safe when their counterparts feel safe. This new Common Security Report is published by the International Trade Union Confederation, the International Peace Bureau, and the Olof Palme International Center. It comes at a time when the world faces severe challenges, particularly in the context of the ongoing war in Ukraine. Global society stands at a crossroads. It's faced with a choice between an existence based on confrontation and aggression, or one that is rooted in a transformative peace agenda and common security. Humanity faces the existential threats of nuclear war and the climate emergency. How we respond to these threats will decide our very survival. We are very lucky to have two outstanding speakers with us this evening, giving the perspectives of two of the organisations that have produced this report. After they've spoken, we'll have time for questions and discussion. So do please put your questions and comments in the Q&A box and use chat. Turning now to our first speaker, that's Sharan Burrow, General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. She's the first woman to hold this post since the ITUC was founded in 2006. By profession a teacher, Sharan is a former president of the Australian Council of Trade Unions. She's also a member of the Global Commission for the Economy and Climate. So welcome, Sharan. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be with you and indeed Reiner. The issue of our common security is more important than ever from the perspective of the peace movement, obviously, and Reiner will talk about that, but from the perspective indeed of the trade union movement, because our common security is very much on the brink. If you go back to the history of the International Labour Organization, then in 1919 it was born out of the ashes of World War I. And the very first words in the ILO's 1919 constitution state that there can be no lasting peace without social justice. We would argue that there can be no social justice without peace. And for us, social justice is embedded in the social contract. But if you look at the social contract that was the promise of the birth of the ILO and then revisited and reaffirmed after World War II with the Philadelphia Declaration, then you see that those ancestors of ours believed, just as we do, that if you don't have a floor of stability, if you don't have shared prosperity, if workers aren't treated with respect, if their families can't live and dream with dignity, then in fact you have the potential for conflict and worse. So trade unions by their very nature actually both create disputes when things are indeed obvious in terms of exploitation, because we fight against exploitation, but it's in our DNA to sit at the table, to negotiate and to resolve conflicts peacefully through collective bargaining, or indeed negotiation of legislation, or in the case of labour rights, then indeed legislative outcomes. I come from a trade union movement as a teacher who actually always had peace at the heart. International peace, peace studies, peace conflict resolution at the heart of its ambitions around the education of our children and the curriculum. Indeed, we're often criticised for that as being too political. But for me, there is nothing more important than what we tried to demonstrate in this report, which is the peace movement coming together, reflecting on our history, and indeed working with trade unions and those who are committed to common security to find the resolutions for a peaceful and a more equal world. Because right now, we actually have a society where the multifaceted nature of crisis is creating despair, anger, violence, and opposition to democracy. We have, in our own global rights survey just released, demonstrated that of the 148 countries covered, 113, think about this, 113 of those countries exclude some or all workers from the protection of unions. That is the right to join a union or freedom of association, one of the anchor points of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And 87% of countries violated the right to strike. So collective bargaining rights were infringed in 80%, and workers in 50 countries experienced physical violence due to their union activities. When you look at that lack of responsibility from governments to protect working people, to ensure human and labour rights, and you add to that the crisis created by historic levels of inequality because the social contract has broken down. Labour income share has plummeted since the 1980s. We see with the advent of globalisation, that's not the problem, but the model is the problem, where you have exploitation, wealth built on exploitation through our supply chains. And then, of course, we have the climate crisis, the emergency that we all have to deal with. But without just transitions, again, people will be left behind. So our message is no stranded people and no stranded communities. COVID-19, the global health shock, exposed the inequality and the lack of commitment of this world to actually share our technology, the vital life-saving technology of vaccines. Vaccine nationalism was not just a scandal in its own right, but a symbol of why we have so many conflicts in the world. And of course, now we have, on top of some 56 other conflicts around the world, the disaster of the abhorrent invasion of Russia into Ukraine and the consequent impact on people's lives and livelihoods, tragically, first and foremost in Ukraine, but in terms of spiraling prices due to inflation in those basic commodities like food and energy. So the world stands at a crossroads. And I must say, Reiner, you and I would agree that when we set out to actually make this project a reality, it was to mark the 40th anniversary, but it wasn't with a view that we would launch the report in the middle of the war in Europe, the first indeed for many, many decades. That's been a shock to everybody, the consequences, but the fact that people would unleash weapons in Europe on each other, and that we would again see the risk of nuclear war, indeed, on the shores of Europe, as indeed around the world. So when you look at this report, we thought that it was really important to restate the reality that our future has to be in our hands, a shared future, but that it has to be based on common security. And the principles none of us would disagree with. All people have the right to human security, freedom from fear, freedom from want. Building trust between nations and peoples is fundamental to peaceful and sustainable human existence. There can be no common security without nuclear disarmament, strong limitations on conventional weapons, and reduced military expenditure. Global and regional multilateralism and the rule of law are critical to tackling many of the world's challenges, and that dialogue, conflict prevention, and confidence building measures must replace aggression and military force as a means of resolving disputes. We need better regulation, international law, and responsible governance must be extended to cover new military technologies, such as as in the realms of cyberspace, outer space, and artificial intelligence. Those are the 6 principles. But why is it so important that we return to the questions of peace, of democracy, of our common security? Well, if you think that indeed an estimated 2 billion people live in conflict-affected countries, and as I said, in 2020, there were 56 other state-based conflicts, and now the war in Ukraine, then we know that that's a world that hasn't dealt with the issues of peace, first and foremost. We also now see a much bigger risk of a geopolitical split, where a multipolar world will be really challenging to see the principles we're all committed to implemented. We know that unless we rebuild the social contract, and we have 6 key demands: jobs, jobs, and jobs, climate-friendly jobs with just transition, human and labour rights with corporate accountability through mandated due diligence, universal social protection. That's at the resilience foundation that people need if they're going to deal with any shock, whether it be climate-related, health-related, or indeed conflict. And if we don't actually have inclusion, equality of income, of course, and shared prosperity, but equality of gender and race, and an inclusive future that is dedicated to to actually achieving the goals that our leaders have set, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Climate Agreement, and of course, the principles that we outline here. And I would hope that our collective efforts will take those to the UN Common Agenda Summit in 2025. So we can put our common security, social justice, the social contract at the heart of the common agenda, just as those things are at the heart of this report. Let me finish with a word on democracy, because I'm very frightened. We're very frightened as a movement about the fact that the trust in democracy is plummeting. It's understandable as a reaction to conflict. It's understandable when people have never seen a democracy dividend, because you have governments who don't put people at the heart of their policy making. But nevertheless, there is no better system than actually struggling to see that we have democratic nations, democratic policies, democratic institutions. And when Freedom House tells you that less than 20% of the global population is actually living in truly free countries, then we have to pay attention to this as a foundation for the common security that we want. I would simply leave you by saying we need national action, of course, but we need global action. And I know Reiner will go through some of the demands we have about demilitarization. But I wanted to place one thing on the agenda. if there's one thing we ask of indeed the UN and its and the UN system, it's got to be that we don't wait and respond to conflict, that we actually do what we attempt to do around climate at the very least. Every year the world comes together to try to deal with the climate crisis, not always successfully, of course, but at least there's the commitment for people to come together, to look for solutions, to negotiate outcomes. The world never comes together to actually look at what it will take to prevent conflict, to indeed ensure that we have a common security. And so even if we could have the world meet around those questions every 3 years is our recommendation, but whatever it is, even if we could do that, that would be a start, because it would be people talking to people about what they see is the sort of social contract that will shore up trust in democracies and create our common agenda. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions and answers.
Thanks very much indeed, Sharan. That was very powerful, and I was particularly struck by your inclusive vision of human security. And you said no stranded people, no stranded communities. And absolutely, I think we must really take that to heart and into our action to ensure that that is the case. Now we turn to Reiner Braun. Reiner is Executive Director of the International Peace Bureau. He's a prominent peace and anti-nuclear campaigner internationally, and he's known to many of us through the No to War, No to NATO network, of which CND is a member. Reiner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you all for taking part of this discussion tonight. You know, what is so important on the Common Security reports today? I think for me, these are really two very important points. The first is the world is spending $2 trillion per year for military purposes. 10 countries of the world are spending 90% of this money. In the same situation, we have about 900 million people which go hungry to bed. We have poverty. We cannot solve the social problems in the world. And how we can do this? We need disarmament. Deep disarmament steps, above all from the big countries, first from the United States, China, the European Union. But for this, we need a climate of cooperation between the countries. And now we have the opposite. The doomsday clock, the famous doomsday clock, the nuclear weapons scientist said we are 100 seconds before midnight. Even in the Cuba crisis 62, we were 7 minutes before midnight. The reason for the nuclear scientists is the climate challenges and the nuclear weapons, the danger of a nuclear weapons war. And these 100 seconds to midnight were announced before the Ukrainian war. So we are in a tremendously dangerous situation that the next world war with nuclear weapons will destroy the whole planet. But how we can overcome this situation? What is needed for that? For this is needed cooperation, dialogue, negotiation, and the nuclear weapons disarmament process. What we see together is the opposite. We need an armament race between all 9 nuclear weapon countries. And when I'm on a webinar with colleagues from Great Britain, why Great Britain will have again nuclear weapons on their soil? This is absolutely the wrong way to go. So this confrontation which we have is the opposite of common security. Common security means, and let me underline this in the beginning, the security interests of the other are just as legitimate as my or your own security interest, and must always taken in account in the sense of cooperative action. This was written in the old Olof Palme report and is written again in the new ones. And let me say it a little bit provocative. When these background and these facts would be the ground of the international politics, we have not to discuss today about the Ukrainian war, because the Ukrainian war is absolutely opposite, not to take into account the security interest of the other side, only thinking about the security interest of one side. So the challenges of the world, the confrontation, cries for an alternative security structure. And this is common security. And what is the revolutionary part of this common security structure? It is that the goal of common security is to ban war as an institution. This would be historical new. We never had that. This is the absolutely important background for the whole report. And then this report described the ways, steps, and actors, how to come to such a world without nuclear weapons. And it said, we need a regionalization of the international security politics. The first Olof Palme report was a report of the bloc confrontation, mainly in Europe. And this report was so successful that it becomes political reality in many parts at the end of the 80s. And this reality is deeply combined with one name, with the name of Mikhail Gorbachev. Today, we need common security strategies, not only for Europe. We definitely need a new peace architecture for Europe after the Ukrainian war. But we need this peace architecture for several parts of the world. For the Korean Peninsula, for the South China Sea, for the Sahel zone. And the report developed the guidelines for such common security regional structures, which is cooperation, dialogue, trust building, reflecting to the common interests of both sides, disarmament, economic relations, ecological solving common problems. This is the background of the report, of the guidelines of the report for the different parts of the world. And this makes the report as a really international report, giving advice for the different regions in the world. And I'm so happy that we have now this launching and discussion process all over the world. We had launching in Asia, we had launching in Africa, we had launching in Latin America. So people are taking the report. The second key point for me is the question of globalization of this report. Because the global problems in the world, and Sharon mentioned the most dramatic one, the climate change, can only be solved in cooperation, or in other terms, on the background of the Common Security Report and the main point of the Common Security Report. Without cooperation, we will not solve any of the global problems. Can you imagine that at the next COP conference, where the enemies will sit in one room, US, NATO countries, Russia, China, they can come to solutions when they are staying in confrontation to each other? Solutions also for the climate challenges are only possible in cooperation. So we have to overcome the confrontation. We have to humanize the competition between them to come to more cooperation. This is the background for solving the climate problem, but also the challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals. Who is speaking about the Sustainable Development Goals as a key challenge for the whole world? And when we want to solve this, we need cooperation. We need the key figures of the Common Security Report. This all means that we need a demilitarization process all over the world. And the key point for demilitarization is definitely on one side, the discussion of the military bases all around the world, but above all about disarmament. Without an international disarmament process, we don't have the financial resources for solving the problems. We don't have the scientific resources because they are going to the military development. And we don't have the creativity of the most intelligent people in the different countries for developing ideas for solving the problem. Now, and that is, I think, the key question, who? And Sharan was playing the ball into my field. Who are the actors for such a common security progress or common security development? The main actor, and I will not exclude the important role of the trade unions and others, the main actor is the peace movement. The peace movement must be revitalized and acting for common security on the local, the regional, the national, and the international level. And these, in this period of hate, which we have in the world now, means also that we have to revitalize an old idea of the peace movement, the peoples to peoples diplomacy. What we need again is a contact from the peoples to the different countries. And for me, it is one of the most stupid decisions in this war made by the European Union, by the NATO, to stop all scientific contacts to Russia. Scientific community and science normally is international and is an exchange. And that we are not giving any financial support for this exchange, that we stop all the programs to Russia, this is for me a very deep, deep mistake. We need these peoples to peoples diplomacy, starting from the context of the peace movement, of the social movement, the trade unions, the churches, the singer clubs, sport clubs, and everyone. Only when people are speaking with each other, when they rebuild and they avoid the enemy picture, which is now created above all in our mass media, we have a chance to develop an atmosphere which is the basic also for other steps in the direction of common security. And that is one very important role of the peace movement. The second important role of the peace movement is we have to mobilize the people for disarmament, for stopping war and disarmament. And what we need, and this is common security, is a diplomacy offensive for solving the Ukraine problem. I don't know how it will be solved at the end, but I know without negotiation and diplomacy, without ideas for diplomacy activities, for looking for moderation and mediation, for using different international, national contexts, these problems will not be solved. So what I expect from the peace movement, also from the parliament in the world, is our suggestions for diplomacy activities to the other side to come again in discussions and in negotiations. Without negotiation, we will not solve the Ukrainian problem and we will not solve all the other problems. No problem will be solved by military, it will be only solved by cooperation and by negotiation and dialogue. So this is the role of the peace movement. This is not the exclusive role of the peace movement. And I'm happy that we had as advisors and experts in the common security report, people coming from the parliaments, coming from the science, coming from government, from diplomacy on different countries of the world, including Russia and China. And we need all these social and political factors to work. And I will say a very good example of the last week that this work is successful. We are 3 or 4 weeks, 3 weeks after the Vienna conference for the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a state conference organized and managed by the Foreign Ministry of Austria. This was a conference where civil society, peace movements, environmental movement, trade unions, and governments and parliamentarians were working together to stop the nuclear arms race and to strengthen the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This is for me one example in which way we have to go. And we have to go and to start with these countries, with these governments and these parliaments and these people which are willing to start to do the first steps in this so difficult situation. My final words are, Willy Brandt said in his famous speech, when he got the Nobel Peace Prize. War is the ultima ratio, peace is the ultima ratio. This means today we have to try to stop the wars, to come to nuclear disarmament, to avoid the social and ecological disaster on this planet. And the Common Security Report is hopefully an instrument which help to develop this process. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Reiner, and thank you for stressing the importance of international cooperation amongst and between the movements, because clearly the problems that we're facing globally today, none of them can be solved on a national level. So it's time for us to step up our international cooperation and really put meaning into that. So thanks very much to Sharan and Reiner. Thanks to those of you who are starting to put your questions in. So I'm going to put a few questions to our two speakers, and then I'm going to ask them both if they'd like to comment on any aspects of them, respond to any of them. And then after we've heard from them, if more questions have come, then we can have a second round. So I think I'm going to put 4 to you. So first of all, Tom says, how do we bridge the gap between the body of opinion that insists nuclear possession is vital for security and our view that believes that nuclear weapons security is a fallacy? And then Linda says, is it not essential that we have the first of the meetings bringing together people on peace now? It's such a good and important idea, with COP being the model. Which organisations internationally might be best to bring that about? Jenny says, China has proposed a global security initiative which advocates the indivisibility of security, that one country cannot make itself secure at the expense of another, as well as a common, comprehensive and sustainable security. What credit or importance would you give this? Some argue this is just rhetoric, since China practices power politics. On the other hand, as Cypri points out, common security cannot be a unilateral decision. How do you see the links between common security and China? And then Jean says, regarding your second recommendation in the document, it says a peace dividend, disarmament and development. But all too often people use the jobs argument to defend military spending and weapons manufacture. How can we address this? So a nice set of diverse and interesting questions. Sharan, would you like to have a go first at any of those?
Well, I certainly want to address the architecture. I think it was Linda who asked, then it is really important that the people of the world come together now and look at the issues that are important to them that would actually make for a common security. And I'm struck by the fact that we have some opportunities, and yet we're not probably making the links as directly as we should. If you have a UN Secretary General who's committed to a common agenda as the basis of the social summit in 2025, then it seems to me that he's already set up for, in some areas, the kind of discussions towards that summit. Why wouldn't we petition him to actually convene a discussion with all sorts of organisations represented to look at how you bring the notion of a common security to that 2025 summit? That's a very first thing we could do. But Reiner's right, we need to mobilise people around these questions right around the world, both nationally and internationally, because our future is indeed entwined. And I like the phrase Reiner used about we have to dispel, it wasn't quite his words, but we have to acknowledge the hate in the world. And I would argue we have to do everything to dispel that and bring people together again to see each other for what we are, human beings. Everybody is somebody's child. And if we're not serious about a future for our children, then, you know, what does it say about us as human beings? It's the same challenges we have with climate. This is not about the planet, because when we're actually extinct or reduced dramatically in numbers, the planet will run clean in terms of clean and green rivers and forests and so on. This is about our future, the future of human beings. The other question that I thought needs addressing is, of course, the issue of jobs. You know, we had to face the same challenge in the context of the climate crisis. There can be no doubt that most of the fossil fuel jobs are indeed well unionized. They're examples of decent work, good wages, good conditions, not everywhere in the world, but in a majority of the developed countries. So it's very hard to convince workers that you have to move to renewable energy when some of the conditions are indeed vastly different. And people fear that those jobs might not be where they are, which is why we coined the term just transition, which is a very simple concept that you actually make sure that where workers are displaced and that there are secure pensions if they're of that age, that where they're younger, they have to have the income support, the skills and the redeployment support, and that we invest in communities to see that we don't leave stranded communities and that there are jobs of the future. If we're serious about demilitarization, that's the same thing. We have to see and convince workers that they need to redesign, that they need to be part of the redesign of their jobs. And we should begin, of course, with the most egregious weapons. But you already have some examples in the UK. You know, you've built transitions in areas of militarization or demilitarization, and we should look at those and look at where it's important that we continue to talk to workers and communities about what needs to happen.
Kate, you are unmuted.
Okay, sorry. Okay, thanks very much, Sharon. Thank you. And Reiner, it's your turn now.
Thank you. Let me only say one sentence to the two jobs, because Sharon is definitely the much more expert in these topics than me. But there is old and new studies about how many jobs are created in the military field, how much jobs are created in the civilian field. This is the minimum 3 to 1. Some of the studies even say 5 to 1. So we have 5 times more jobs in the civilian area than in the military area. This is not, this does not solve the problem that the jobs in the military area are much better paid, but it shows that there's definitely the possibility to create much more jobs in the civilian area than in the military. And, you know, after 2 years or 2.5 years of Corona, I only say how many jobs we need in the healthcare area to solve these healthcare problems of the world. I think this is similar if we are going to the US or similar or going to Great Britain or to Germany. So we have a lot of possibilities for civilian jobs. What we need is a political will to create these jobs and also to pay them. And again, when we are paying 2 trillion per year for military purposes, we don't have this money to give it to the civilian sector or also for civilian jobs. The second point, you know, is a question to nuclear. I will say very clear and very easy. Deterrence, historical and actual, will never solve the problem of nuclear weapons. Deterrence is to play a game which is only based on luck. That we are sitting here and can discuss is historically luck, because, you know, we were several times absolutely nearby an accident which destroyed the whole world of nuclear weapons. So the only way we can solve the nuclear weapons problem is to abolish nuclear weapons, and that must be the goal. And all the more nuclear weapons even create more problems. Above all, the new generation of nuclear weapons are also the so-called mini nukes, which are used as field weapons, and they reduced the will and the possibility to use these weapons in quite so-called normal wars, but with a huge factor of destroyment and radioactivity disasters. You know, yes, I'm very much in favor of more international cooperation, but let me first say, peace work first and above all is the work at home. We have to convince people to act where they are living, working, staying, and coming together. So what I, above all, always want to underline that we have to strengthen the peace movement in the different cities, countries, and regions. That is the basic, how we can convince more people against militarism, how we can reduce hate and hate speeches. So we need to strengthen the peace movement above all where we are living. This is not an argument against national and international cooperation, but it's the basic for international cooperation. And frankly speaking, maybe Kate and Sharon are other opinions, but I think the international cooperation of the peace movement is not so bad. Let me say 2 points only for that. One is the peace wave. We had the peace wave around the world on the 25th and 26th of June. This was a peace wave which include all parts of the world. In 12 time zones, we developed actions and showed the actions all around the world. Very creative. Film, music, actions on the street, poetry, whatever. And I think we will definitely continue this way of bringing the peace movement together. The second, and I'm here as IPB representative, was the World Conference of IPB in Barcelona, with about 900 people attending and about 3,000 online. So also people from 115 countries were coming together. We definitely should and will continue this. And the next step we are preparing is a global gathering around the 20 years anniversary of the European Social Forum in Florence in autumn, where we had this huge decision for the demonstration on 15th of February 2003 against the Iraq war, which mobilized millions of people on the street. Yes, we should enlarge and the international cooperation, but above all, I think we have to strengthen the peace movement where we are living and staying. My last point to China. I think China and security is an own webinar. Let me say 2 points. First point, when the Chinese government writes and said that it wants to work on the basis of common security, we have to take this very seriously and have to see what this means and ask for discussion and dialogue about this concept with the Chinese government and with the Chinese constitution. One problem I see, and this is a problem that today, for me, the most difficult and dangerous hotspots in the world is the region around Taiwan. The problem of the Chinese politics of common security is that for China, Taiwan is a part of China. This means it's not a part of the common security politics. And this creates, wherever you are staying to Taiwan, this creates problems. So what we need, and this is also the approach of our report, is to develop a common security politics, a common security suggestions for the whole Chinese South Asia region. And we are working with Chinese and other colleagues on this field. That is absolutely needed because with all these militarization around China and Taiwan, the danger of a nuclear war by purpose or by accident is tremendously high. So we have to find ways out of these crises.
Kate, could I just formally put on record our total commitment as a union movement to the nuclear non-proliferation treaty and the TPNW, because there is no question for us. That is not about the issue of jobs. That is about, indeed, the very worst of the risk to humanity. And as we're approaching the anniversary, of course, of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, our Japanese unions will again be at the forefront of reminding people about why this is absolutely unacceptable. On China, can I just say I totally agree with Reiner. We must always be prepared to engage in dialogue. But right now, I don't understand the China of today versus the China of 6 or 7 years ago, where there was, in fact, a commitment to opening up to dialogue, to looking at much more, engagement in a shared future approach. When you look at Hong Kong today, Reiner's right to point out Taiwan, because when you look at Hong Kong, our union leaders are in jail. Democracy, any kind of democratic space, has been just shut down, and our unions dissolved. So this is, I don't want anyone to think this is an easy path, but I also want to underscore what Reiner said. If you can get the conditions for dialogue, then we have to engage, because otherwise the alternative is that we actually not just divide the world, we actually hand over any hope of shared a common security for the future.
Thanks very much. Thanks for adding that, Sharan. Before I go to some more questions, I just want to touch on a couple of things that Reiner said about the peace movement. And you said that you felt that the peace movement internationally does have, a great commonality, and we have a kind of sharing of ideas and strategy and action. And I very much agree with that. And in fact, my experience of working with the international peace movement over the last couple of decades is that we almost always come to the same conclusions, even without coming together and talking about it in advance. When we meet, we have the shared analysis, because our principles, doesn't matter what nation we are, what nationality, we have that shared vision of peace. We know what is necessary to bring that about. So I absolutely agree with you on that. And then you mentioned the 20th anniversary of that European Social Forum in Florence. When you have details of that, if it's going to be an event or something, please share it, because I remember going on that demonstration through Florence and how cold it was and eating a lot of chocolate. My memories. But it was an absolutely fantastic and kind of path-breaking event, which did indeed lead to that incredible global mobilization. So we've just got time. We've got the two more contributions on Ukraine, so I'll put those together, and then one from me. So Linda says, how can we find out from the people of Ukraine and Russia what they want to stop the war? What is it that will give them common security? And Tom says, is reconciliation possible between the mothers of Russia and the mothers of Ukraine? Both have lost their sons, daughters, fathers to war now and in history. Why more pain for all? Some very human sentiments there. And then my own question. I've read the report. I think it's absolutely outstanding. There's so much of great interest in it. And towards the end, just before you come to, it's in the section on recommendations. You say the recommendations should be spread through representative organisations and forums such as the UN Social Summit, the World Social Forum, World Economic Forum, OSCE, and so on. All of which I absolutely agree with. But I can imagine, you could say, well, this is all very positive and nice, but it's very aspirational. And when you have the kind of great powers, the nuclear weapon states and so on, setting themselves against it, how can we really break through? What can take the recommendations of this report beyond being good aspirations, essential aspirations, into something which can actually really kind of deliver for the people? So those are the concluding questions. So Sharan, would you like to go first again?
Well, on the second one, let me just say that it's about the power of people. And I want to return to the struggle for democracy, because if we really want our leaders, nationally and internationally, to seriously listen to people, then we have to organise. And that's where Reiner was absolutely right about starting, to rebuild a collaborative effort around common security in our own nations, in our own neighbourhoods. And I think that that's why we fight for democratic traditions. You can't hand a dictator a set of recommendations and expect that they're going to have any interest if it's not in their own sphere of expectations around retaining power. So it is about democracy. It is around organising. It is around expecting our leaders, if they want our support at the ballot box, to actually commit to a future that we actually see as one that will deliver common security on the shared values you talked about, Kate.
Thanks very much, Sharan. And anything you wanted to say around the Ukraine questions?
Well, for us, it's very easy to actually to understand from a trade union perspective what our unions want. Of course, they want peace. They want a plan for reconstruction that will bring people back to the country, will reunite families, will rebuild their nation. But I am struck by the question, because we ponder it too. How do you restart dialogue? I haven't been always popular when I've said to people, do not let Putin's actions, which are abhorrent, actually create a hatred between peoples of not just Ukraine, but peoples from anywhere with the people of Russia. So any people-to-people dialogue that can be generated, I think, is very important. Mindful, and we're very mindful of this, because our Belarusian unions who actually spoke out in defence of peace are now in jail, and we've had one union dissolved just in the last few days by the Supreme Court. So mindful of people's security in both parts, in both countries, or in any countries surrounding the neighbourhood. But I will say this, if we don't find a way to construct dialogue, then I have to say I'm very frightened, not so much about invasion, but about creeping authoritarianism as a first step, and therefore the potential for conflict in the neighbouring countries, because you have to have a look at the breakdown in the border countries around Russia of human and labour rights, and that's the start of actually saying that our democracies are no longer, or those democracies are no longer working for people. Difficult, but dialogue is always and has always to be at the heart of our ambitions.
Absolutely. Thanks very much indeed, Sharan. And Reiner, your concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you. Let me answer the question of reconciliation between Ukrainian and Russia from a perspective of a German citizen. Germany, the fascist Germany, killed 27 million Soviet Union people, not only Russians, but all the different nations in the Soviet Union. And after the war, in a long period, we got again friendly and very nice and great relations to the people in Russia and the Soviet Union. So reconciliation, even in this situation where we destroyed a whole country, killed 27 million of their people, it was possible to come to friendly relations between the people again. We have to work on this. We have to find ways for dialogue and discussion with them. But in general, looking at the history, it is possible. So I think it's also possible to Russia and Ukraine. And never forget, we are discussing about Russia and Ukraine. We are not discussing about the political leaders of these countries. We are always discussing about the people of these countries. And what IPB was doing during this war period, we arranged 4 webinars from activists from Russia and from Ukraine, which were against the war. Voices for Peace from Russia and Ukraine was the title. And these women and men were talking with each other very polite, very friendly, very connected in the fight for peace. So this is for me also a good start point, and it's definitely the work of IPB and other peace organizations to organize such a discussion, such a dialogue, above all when it is war. And I hope that we definitely will continue organizing these dialogues. And I think this is the only way how we can avoid that we have in the middle of Europe, and Ukraine is quite in the middle of Europe. It is not so far away from Vienna. These dialogue between the different countries. So this is my answer to the Ukrainian question. And Kate, your question is really difficult. When I'm looking to the Olof Palme report at that time, when the report was presented to the United Nations by Olof Palme, he was the prime minister. No one, really no one was taking care of the report. It was only a small note in some of the newspapers. The report becomes important because in the different countries, the people were working with the report. The governments in some countries like Germany, Egon Bahr was a member of this commission, and he was also very much connected to the German government at that time. They take it and make it to political reality in their country, or were working in this direction. Then it becomes powerful. And that has become worldwide political majority. This is connected to one name. This is Mikhail Gorbachev. And this is the point for me today. What I'm deeply missing is courageous international politicians which are not easily following the mainstream, but looking for alternative ideas, how constructively you can develop the global problems of the world. And this we are absolutely missing now. I can't see these politicians. I'm searching everywhere, but I can't see them. So what does this mean for us? For me, it means we have to create and try to create an atmosphere in the different countries that we have an interesting and open discussion about the report. I think this is the key point which we can do. This means in relation to churches, trade unions, parliaments, politicians which are open, and together with them to create another atmosphere, which is not any longer the confrontational atmosphere of hate and accusation which we have now. It is quite impossible to read newspapers for me. You know, that is every day the same and no ideas for the future. So that I think we are much behind the situation of 82. So we have to create an atmosphere, and I hope that with this atmosphere, there will be also political leaders in the different countries, which take the report or elements of the report, try to develop and create a new politics in their countries. I think this is my hope. My hope that this report will take it over maybe in other parts of the world much earlier than in Europe and in the US is a hope. When I'm looking to Latin America, I have hope. When I'm also looking to some countries in Asia, I also get some hope that they are taking this report. And also there's a new discussion about the elites in Africa. Maybe the new ideas and changes come from other parts of the world, not any longer from the traditional parts like Europe and the US. So that is a little bit the background of my thinking, that we need a new atmosphere, international atmosphere, that hopefully will lead to new actions and activities in the direction of common security.
Thanks very much, Reiner. And what you said there about leadership from the global south, I mean, I think that is tremendously important. And of course, we've seen that with the advancing of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, the states, the overwhelming majority of states that signed that, supported it and taken it forward are indeed the states of the global south and civil society working together with them. So I guess that's a kind of potentially a bit of a model of how we can go forward with this. But of course, as you say, also taking it forward in our own countries, however difficult that may be. So I think in thanking you both very much, both Sharan and Reiner, for those amazingly interesting and thought-provoking contributions. I'm hoping we're all committing, or the audience this evening, the thousands who are going to watch this over the next few days through our streaming services, will all commit not only to reading the report, which I absolutely recommend to people, but to thinking about how we can share that, how we can take that into our organisations and our communities and bring it to bear and bring its principles to bear on our politicians and across our communities. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us this evening, and onwards and upwards. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.